Good evening, everybody. My name is Katrine Eisman. I'm the chair of the Masters in Digital Photography program here at the School of Visual Arts. Welcome to a special lecture. We're thrilled to welcome Ramzi Rizk from EyeEm. He's a co-founder and chief technology officer. And I've known about EyeEm now for 2 or 3 years, and it's a fabulous social media platform for photographers. And I really do enjoy the sense of community that they've developed. But tonight, Ramzi is going to be talking about artificial image aesthetics intelligence, something that I know I'm very personally interested in. And so we're looking forward to your presentation. Help me welcome Ramzi.
Thank you. I do not need that.
No.
Nor this. Cool, yeah. Thanks, Kathleen. It's really cool being here. And I'm looking forward to an open conversation about what technology is doing to photography and to the world of photography. So at EyeEm, we're primarily first and foremost about community. We started this company 6 years ago, give or take, with this vision of enabling, empowering amateur photographers to connect, to learn, to interact, to develop their skills, and actually get discovered. You know, it's we wanted, explicitly to not be a photo sharing app per se, but rather a platform for photographers, which meant there was a lot of focus on the offline as well. We still do organize exhibitions. We organize the world's largest photography competition with something like 270, 280,000 photos submitted to this year's edition. We develop and produce magazines. We organize masterclasses, talks. We invite photographers to give lectures to our community. We organize global photo walks with the sole purpose of enabling people who have discovered this passion for photography, which we had as founders, empowering them and enabling them to just get better at it, to learn, to improve their skills, and eventually get discovered. Over the past 5 years, this community has grown significantly. So we're at a little more than 18 million photographers with something like 80, 90 million photos altogether in 150 countries. And one common question that came up quite often in the last couple of years was, what's next? What's beyond my next like? And as a photographer, we measure sort of our worth on most social platforms with the number of likes you get, the number of comments you get, the social engagement. And we realized that if you're a good photographer, then there's a monetary value to your photos as well. So we decided that we wanted to launch our marketplace. And the reason we did that was twofold. On the one hand, our photographers were asking, what is next? What do I get out of this? And brands, agencies, companies were reaching out to us and telling us, you have this amazing community that creates really authentic imagery, different imagery to what we typically see. You have these missions that can engage photographers in a way that they hadn't seen before. And how can we get involved? So when we launched the marketplace, really the essence of it was a very simple, very transparent, very easy way for anyone, literally anyone who uploads a photo, to be able to monetize that photo and make money with it, changing a little bit how the stock photography industry works. This is a slide that I actually always put whenever I'm talking, because to me it sort of signifies the problem that we have today. This is an exhibition that Eric Kessels did, a Dutch photographer or Dutch artist. I think it must have been 10 years ago. And what he did was he printed out every single photo that was uploaded to Flickr on one day and threw it around the room. And to me, this is really the problem that we are dealing with. The challenge today is not one of creation. 100 years ago, there were way too few photos being created, which meant that every single photo was fundamentally valuable just because it was rare. Today, the challenge is not one of creation, but rather of discovery, rather of consumption. And this is something that we faced as well launching our marketplace. There's a simple reason why stock photo platforms are not open to everyone. They have relatively strict rules into who they let in, and they have a relatively uniform kind of content that they present. And the reason behind that is really that they are just unable to scale up. They cannot manually process more than that. Typically, a photo that goes through one of these platforms, starting to change now, but typically it would take several weeks from the minute you post it, unless you're some verified professional photographer who's been working with them for ages. It takes several weeks from the minute you post a photo to the minute it's available for sale. Reason being, there are photo editors reviewing every single photo, deciding this is good, this is bad, checking if it's copyrighted or not, checking if it's, if the resolution is high enough, checking if it's underexposed, overexposed, if it fits the aesthetic, whatever that is. And then it gets shipped off to one of 3 locations in the UK, Poland, or India, where there's people actually manually tagging each and every single photo, adding these keywords that photographers and photo editors love, like getting away from it all and into the future and whatnot. So we realized that in order to sort of open this up to everyone and encourage diversity and bring in content from 150 countries, from 20 million photographers, we had to automate a big part of that process. And this is really the sort of the focal point of the talk today, how we have built technology and we've leveraged technology in order to be able to scale up that entire platform. Moving into that a little bit, what we really were faced with initially was 2 things that we had to solve. We had to figure out what was in the photo in order to make it searchable. Searchable means sellable. Sellable means photographer gets paid and the client finds what they're looking for. And we had to figure out the problem, or how to solve the problem of quality. With trillions of photos, I think something like 1.2 trillion photos were shared online last year. That is probably more than the entire history of mankind before. These numbers always vary, but it's still more than enough for any single human, or more than what any single human could ever consume. Most of this content gets lost in some sort of digital nirvana, and really a small sliver of those images get discovered. And our sort of premise was, there's a Robert Capa walking around somewhere here that will never be discovered. There's a Vivian Maier who's actually sort of the poster child of getting lost in the noise and then suddenly being discovered years later. And so we decided, or we realized that we had to build this other side of the technology, finding what's in the photo, understanding what defines the photo, both on a sort of on a concrete level of beanie and sunglasses and looking to the left, and also understanding what is the aesthetic, the abstract notions within that photo, lusting for a vacation, longing, fear, anger, love, family, all of that stuff. And of course, again, the aesthetic score. The question that often comes up is, you're saying that you can actually understand whether a photo is beautiful or not, whether a photo is aesthetically pleasing or not, but isn't beauty subjective? And the answer is no. So, talking about the photographer's workflow, we basically see how a photographer basically starts working and goes through that cycle of getting inspired, creating the imagery, having that content organized, and eventually distributing it or sharing it online or whatever. You can actually expand on that a little bit and say there's processing and there's storage and there's search and so on. But typically the process falls into these 4. So what I would like to quickly run through is a bunch of the tools that we've actually built for our own platform that help photographers or support and automate a big part of this process. When it comes to inspiration, we've always wanted to be able to avoid that idea of if you get more likes, you're a better photographer. So we had to use the aesthetics and a bunch of other technologies that we've built to train the machine to actually find these sort of diamonds in the rough, find these photographers that join EyeEm, have 0 followers, follow nobody, upload a couple of photos that are really good, that the system knows are aesthetically pleasing, and we suddenly boost those people up so that they get some of the exposure that others don't. So if you go on our popular feed, you will actually discover typically it's not about likes and it's not about how many people have followed you, because that's a system, that is a game that is very, very easy to trick. What we've gone further is actually supporting, for example, our curator team in finding photos that they want to feature. So instead of basically, there's always bias, right? There's a bias in the machine, but there's also bias in humans as well. And when you're trying to curate a set of photos, you sort of go with the stuff that you know, one way or the other. You go with photographers that you know, you go with tags that you know, you go with content that you know. So by introducing that element of serendipity, if you want, of randomness, of a machine actually suggesting some content, we're augmenting and increasing the chances of having amateurs and sort of people who were before that unknown get discovered. So going a little further onto the organizational side of things, the other problem I think that a lot of us face is that I have this one photo in mind that I took a year ago at the beach, and then you open up your phone and you start scrolling and scrolling down through the months and through the years until you get to that point, and then you sort of try to find which one of those photos it was. So we built and launched an app called The Roll, totally separate app, that basically organize your camera roll. And it's one of a set of tools that we're building that allows you to organize photos wherever they are. They could be on your Lightroom, they could be on your hard drive somewhere in the cloud. And the idea there is twofold. We shoot more content, we shoot more photos than before. Just because we're digital means we take the same photo twice. I try to avoid that personally. I try to actually shoot analog exactly to avoid that, because there's that aesthetic part of photography that still speaks to me, and that's sort of my personal release when I sort of breathe out and try to catch that between the two heartbeats and click the shutter. There's something kind of aesthetically analog and beautiful about that. But most people shoot a bunch of photos, and what we try to do with this and with the tools that we're building around it is to actually group those photos by time, by location, by category. And if they're identical, if you shoot 10 portraits of the same person, then to try to understand a little bit what the style is and sort of surface the most relevant image up to the top, so you don't have to go through 20 photos that are identical. So it's really just a better way, I guess, to organize. So if you look at these sort of tools that we've built and think of our marketplace, where we get hundreds of thousands of photos submitted into the marketplace every day, there's no way, particularly as a small company, where we can just process all of that content manually. The automatic argument against this is, well, that means some people are being unfairly punished and their photos being rejected or rated as poor or poorly tagged. But the purpose here is really that the majority of these people would not have gotten discovered at all in the first place. So what we've done is we've taken that process that takes several weeks and cut it down into milliseconds on your phone effectively. You take a photo within seconds or within milliseconds of that photo being taken, the algorithm has filtered it into high commercial value, low commercial value, average commercial value, has checked whether it's copyrighted or not, has checked whether it's whether it fits a certain taste, certain style, checked for not safe for work content, stuff that goes against terms of service, added the keywords that are needed to actually understand what is in the photo, make it searchable, and made it ready for distribution, whether on the EyeEm marketplace itself or through our partners, or even for customers that are looking for that particular specific kind of imagery. So that is also something that is heavily augmented through technology. One thing that we wanted to play around with was we had this mission, Overnight Success, which I think something like 12,000, 13,000 photos were submitted to that mission that we did together with SVA. And we wanted to run a little experiment where we took 100 photos out of that set and had people from SVA pick their 5 favorite photos. And we also had the machine pick its 5 favorite photos. And I think it's interesting. It's interesting for a variety of reasons. And I think this is the exact conversation we should be having after. So the top 5 photos that were picked by SVA, first 2 are here, and the next 3 are there. Pretty photos. I mean, no one can argue with that, right? Beauty is subjective, but it's not. The machine actually went for something slightly different. It's the sense of aesthetic that it has understood to be valuable and appreciated by the EyeEm community and by our sellers. So there's definitely a bias towards people. There's definitely a bias towards content that is more emotional. And there's a bias to a certain extent against that HDR feel of particularly long exposure night shots, just because it's something that we've trained for. But that begs the question, right? There is not one sense of aesthetic. It is not subjective. As I said in the beginning, beauty isn't subjective, and there are some studies behind that. But there's a baseline of aesthetics that everyone will agree upon. We looked at those 10 photos and we all thought, okay, these are good photos. And we can look at some really bad imagery and we'll all say these are bad photos. There is, unless you have context, which is a totally different question. But how do you go from that to actually personalization? How do you go from these are all good photos to these are good photos for posting on Instagram, and these are good photos for sending to my parents, and these are good photos for selling on Getty, and these are good photos to actually not sell anywhere and just frame and print and try to have an exhibition around. What we did there is we basically taught the machine to actually understand the tastes, the individual tastes of people, of brands, of agencies, of partners, of professional photographers. So the way you need to look at it is basically teaching machines to see photos through the eyes of Vice magazine, or through the eyes of Ansel Adams, or through the eyes of Beyonce, or whatever. And by doing that, you're just changing how you sort content, changing how you present content. I'll give you a little example, which we run with one of our largest clients, the Boston Consulting Group. They do run a lot of missions with us, and typically they want to license a bunch of photos from those missions. And when you have a mission that has 50,000 photos submitted, it takes a lot of curators a lot of time to sort through that content. So one of the missions that we ran with them, these are the top 5 photos that the machine found. So the machine thought these 5 photos really are aesthetically pleasing. However, we knew historically that this is the kind of content that BCG buys. As you can tell, it's lots of tension, lots of geometry, lots of patterns, no people. We take these photos and we train the aesthetics on top of, we train the personalization on top of the standard aesthetics that we have. And suddenly from that same data set of 50,000 photos, instead of these photos being in the very top, suddenly these photos are at the very top. And the machine now has understood that this is what they're looking for. Naturally, there's always the question of, does it evolve with the bias? Does it change and so on? But these are really questions that take a lot of time to answer. Which brings us really, to me, to the actual question of what we're talking about. If I tell you people that, or you guys that there's an algorithm that can look at a photo and recognize with a 99% accuracy whether there's a cat in that photo, so what? It's been done, been there for 10 years. If I say there's an algorithm that looks at a photo and actually can tell if that photo is appealing or not, there's a bit of a question mark there, because we personally still don't understand ourselves how we identify beauty, even though there's been a lot of work in neuroscience that goes in that direction. But the question that bothers me to a certain extent is that there's this dystopic vision of the world in 5 years where machines are now creating content. And to me, there's this nightmare, this recurring nightmare that I got in the beginning of preparing these talks, which is the machine turning us into glorified selfie sticks? Are we at some point going to be living in a world where your phone vibrates and says, pull me out right now? And you take your phone out and it's like the camera's on and it's like turn left, turn right, stop, tilt, wait 30 seconds, okay, thank you. The photo is taken, the phone edits the photo, figures out how to process the photo, figures out where to upload it, and just tells you, put me back in your pocket, and then keep walking. That's sort of the dystopic future. The utopic future, in my mind, is where we could be getting to a point where we're distilling photography to the essence of what it really is. Being a photographer is not about tagging a photo with 20 keywords to make sure it sells somewhere. Being a photographer is not about trying to, spending hours trying to find those images that you took. Being a photographer is about seeing a moment, capturing a moment, envisioning something beautiful in your mind, and finding a way to actually create that, recreate that digitally on prints. And there's a whole bunch of these apps and these products that are out there that actually are already starting to edit content. Prisma actually is an app that can recreate a photo in the style of a specific artist. We actually did a lot of work as well where we understood how people process content, process imagery in a specific world, and then teach the machine to actually process photos in the same way for that particular use case. So to me, this is really the big question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because that would be the end of my talk.
So, dystopia or utopia? Peter, you have some thoughts?
This is the, I mean, we talked briefly about this last Thursday night, and I'm kind of baffled. I love the whole idea, but it kind of really scares me too. And I know it's the future, and we all have to be future thinking. We can't be all sitting around a room talking about how come we don't shoot 4x5 film anymore, and why nobody wants to do that. So, and it reminds me, the whole thing where you take the camera out of your pocket and it tells you to take a picture. Reminds me recently that they fed all these Beatles songs into this algorithm, and it made a the computer made a Beatles song, and it was awful. Yeah. So I don't, maybe the picture is not going to be so great when the camera tells. Well, it
gets worse, right? It gets worse. There's this. We're still at that point talking of a machine augmenting your work. You're basically a mindless drone that is just moving a camera around, but it's still a machine augmenting your world. You can go one step further and say, for the world of stock photography, a photo editor will just say, I want a photo of a dog jumping on a beach, sunny day, slightly wavy. and the machine will create that image out of the blue.
Just added with no visual context
With
at
no
all. They'll
visual
just
context.
design it, just
Not-
put it
so
together.
it's not cropped, it's not photoshopped. It's actually pixel by pixel being created by a machine. And there's a lot of work that has gone in that direction. There's already machines that are creating music, like you said, still in its infancy. There's machines that are designing chairs.
Isn't that what they do like at Pixar though? Like there's no actors except for the voices.
Yeah, but that's CGI. So it's still they're drawing it. In this case, the machine is just creating everything, and you tell it, no, this is not what I had in mind. I want it to be a little happier, and the machine understands what happy means somehow, and tries to draw on its wealth of knowledge. If you think about the whole game with this machine learning stuff, is data, is this wealth of data that we have that we didn't have 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Of course, there's a lot of science to it, there's a lot of hardware to it, but the essence is data. And if you think about, there's probably 1 billion photos of dogs on the beach on Instagram that are
That's low, right?
Yeah. There is at least that, let's say. That's more than enough data for a machine to actually be able to first understand what that means, and then start creating similar content.
But does it take you to feed those pictures of the dogs on the beach and on it from Instagram into the machine to figure out what a dog on the beach looks like?
Yes. So that's, to me, that is really the limit of where we are right now with all of this technology. It is still always based on prior knowledge. You have data, you have labeled data, you have structured data, you write algorithms that can somehow recreate or understand that data. We are not at a point, and we won't be for a while, where a machine sees a cat on a beach and then infers that this is a cat, there must be a dog, or tries to actually start creating things out of from scratch based on no prior knowledge. There's always some sense of knowledge. The minute that happens, I think our least worry should be whether photography is going to survive or not, because then we should be really scrambling for the hills.
Oh yeah. I've seen those Terminator movies.
Exactly.
I know what happens.
Exactly. That's kind of.
So two points question. I have the role on my iPhone, and sometimes I'm really not happy with its decision.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good for me to bring my ego down. It's fine.
But I wouldn't then assume that it's right and you're wrong.
Okay.
It's it's nice. It's very nice of you to say that it's an ego it keeps the ego in check.
Keeps me humble.
But the reality is, this is not an all-knowing savant. This is not an oracle. It's limited by what it's seen, and it could be one that your style of photography is something that it had never seen before, and that way it doesn't know how to evaluate it. It could also be that there's a certain bias that the machine hasn't understood and can't relate to. And at the end of the day, all of this stuff is statistics. All of this stuff is really simple. I mean, it's really complicated, but it's simply statistics, which means every single algorithm we have in there really has two numbers. One we call precision and one we call recall. Precision means how many if there's 100 photos that the machine detects as beautiful, how many of those are actually beautiful? And if there's 100 beautiful photos, how many of those will the machine detect as beautiful is recall. So we always try to optimize for both of these depending on the use case. If we're trying to sell photos, we would rather, since we have a lot of content, we would rather not have poorly tagged images. So we tell the machine, focus on getting it right and not getting all of them. Whereas if we're looking on a personal aesthetics kind of thing, we're like, try to get all of them, not necessarily care for getting it right. Mm-hmm. So because there's these two different use cases, and at the end of the day, it could be that all of your photos are in that 20%. The machine is 85% of the time accurate, 15% of the time it's not, and we're talking about billions and billions of photos. So it could be right. There's a whole variety of reasons why it's not 100%, and why this stuff will actually never be at 100%. Just out of the box by itself. There's a lot of logic that has to go into it one way or the other. Another example is how these models work technologically is they look at sample sets of data. They have 1,000 photos of a dog, 1,000 photos of a tree, 1,000 photos of a beach. And you train a model that understands dog, tree, and beach. And you throw a photo of a cat in there. It'll probably say this is a dog. And it would be really confident that it's a dog, because it's the closest thing it looks at. But it's never seen a cat before, so it has no idea what that is. And that's the same case with photos and with aesthetics.
So I'm interested in, there seems to be a number of options now where photographers can sell their images. I mean, now there's Adobe stock, there's this. Could you talk a little bit about literally what the photographer gets or how they benefit, or
On EyeEm?
Yeah, what's the incentive?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the prime incentive is, or one of the main incentives is the fact that it's a 50-50 split, which is typically higher than most standard stock sites. Another incentive is a decision that we took early on, which is we didn't want to be in the cents business. We don't want to sell photos for 10 cents. The least you can buy a photo on EyeEm is 20 bucks, 25, 20, I think. And there's a point of that, which is anything below that, to me, it might take away a little bit from you being a photographer to you becoming someone who's just shooting to sell and then shooting volume, shooting 500 photos of that cliche happy couple having a picnic, hoping that you sell enough of them to make money. And for us, it's more about beautiful imagery, unique, distinct imagery. So the second reason would be that. The third reason would be the fact that our missions product is probably the biggest on the market and definitely the most widest reaching, which means that we do a lot of commissioning work with photographers that the other platforms can't do because of technology. Fourth being the technology in place itself, which automates that entire process, and your photo could be selling within seconds versus within days, hours, weeks, or whatever.
With all the photographers that you have, are you still looking for photographers?
Yes and no. I mean, we're not looking for photographers because we need photos, but the whole claim that we had day one was the way stock works is broken because it's not diverse enough, because it goes for one sense of aesthetic, for more or less one demographic, one sense of aesthetic, one look, one feel. And we believe that by actually broadening the horizons, you can just have so much more diversity and so much more beauty. You don't need to fake things. If you want photos from Costa Rica, then you can source photos in real time from Costa Rica and not have to pretend some other photo is Costa Rica. If you want photos of a family, it could get to a point where every photo gets licensed only once because there's enough diversity out there. So it's not a numbers game. It's a quality game for sure, and it's a diversity game. And so, the more photos, the merrier. The more photographers, the merrier.
How are the people for the marketplace, the people who are buying the photos, how are they interacting with, and specifically the rating, the quality rating?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. So we distribute through stock sites as well. We distribute through Getty and through Adobe and so on. We sell on our own marketplace, and we sell through our enterprise partnerships with larger customers that have specialized deals. In some cases, we don't have access to the data. In other cases, we do know exactly what photos who bought for what project. How aesthetics works is effectively it's sets of photos that are rated as very good, rated as very bad, rated as commercially very viable, commercially unviable, rated as very interesting and very boring. And by looking at all of these dimensions and training big, basically deep learning models on top of that, that's how the system works. So every time a photo is purchased, every time a photo is published, every time one of our curators picks a photo for an exhibition, every time one of our blog editors picks a photo to feature on the blog, all of this is input that tells us something about that photo and helps us train the next iteration of the algorithm. At the end of the day, though, for individual customers, it's something that we've actually just launched. And for individual customers, we have this thing we call personalized aesthetics, which means the more you buy, the more the system understands exactly what you're looking for. And the more the search is really catered to your specific taste. And of course, then it's almost a one-to-one relationship. So more content bought, that exact content goes to train the model to understand, which is what you saw with the BCG example earlier.
But so to understand it, you get to the idea of the aesthetically good images from the statistics. you haven't like set some ideas of good aesthetics into the algorithm, like foreseeing the rule of thirds or some things like that?
That's a very good question. So I mentioned there's this field of neuroscience, or this theory in neuroscience called visual saliency, which loosely translated maps to love at first sight, more or less. That's at least how I see it. And the idea behind visual saliency is before you actually understand the details, the composition, the content of a photo or of something that you see, you have already decided whether it's visually appealing or not, whether it's aesthetically pleasing or not. So this is the thing that we try to teach the machine. There's a lot of research that has been done into trying to go for the rules, right? Trying to go for the golden third, trying to go for symmetry, trying to go for contrast, trying to look at specific exposure settings. But that is too rigid, too strict, and that will actually quite often lead to a very, very boring, very mundane, very uniform imagery being promoted to the top. So the algorithms that really use these sort of rules don't work very well. That is why we leave it effectively a little more vague. We just say these are good photos, these are bad photos, and we have a bunch of thoughts on how the machine should actually train, but we don't tell it specifically, look for the golden third, or look for whichever rule, right? And the reality is, because of the diversity of content, you could never have enough. You could never have enough rules. An overexposed photo of a table might be really bad. An underexposed photo of a person might be really good. It depends on the context, it depends on the framing, it depends on the subject matter, it depends on the story that you're trying to tell. So the rules, I think the rules, and again, there's this saying, right? The good photographers know the rules, the great photographers know how to break them. And so we want the machine to understand beauty and not understand rule of thirds.
Well, I think you've given us a lot to think about, and also sort of shown us how rich photography is and how much potential there still is.
Absolutely, my
And
pleasure.
Exactly. We all communicate in images. So I want to thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
The social engagement. And we realized that if you're a good photographer, then there's a monetary value to your photos as well. So we decided that we wanted to launch our marketplace. And the reason we did that was twofold. On the one hand, our photographers were asking, what is next? What do I get out of this? And brands, agencies, companies were reaching out to us and telling us, you have this amazing community that creates really authentic imagery, different imagery to what we typically see. You have these missions that can engage photographers in a way that they hadn't seen before. And how can we get involved? So when we launched the marketplace, really the essence of it was enabling people who have discovered this passion for photography, which we had as founders, empowering them and enabling them to just get better at it, to learn, to improve their skills, and eventually get discovered. Over the past 5 years, this community has grown significantly. So we're at a little more than 18 million photographers with something like 80, 90 million photos altogether in 150 countries. And one common question that came up quite often in the last couple of years was, what's next? What's beyond my next like? And as a photographer, we measure sort of our worth on most social platforms with the number of likes you get, the number of comments you get.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Katrine Eisman. I'm the chair of the Masters in Digital Photography program here at the School of Visual Arts. Welcome to a special lecture. We're thrilled to welcome Ramzi Rizk from EyeEm. He's a co-founder and chief technology officer. And I've known about EyeEm now for 2 or 3 years, and it's a fabulous social media platform for photographers. And I really do enjoy the sense of community that they've developed. But tonight, Ramzi is going to be talking about artificial image aesthetics intelligence.
Photographers to connect, to learn, to interact, to develop their skills, and actually get discovered. It's we wanted explicitly to not be a photo sharing app per se, but rather a platform for photographers, which meant there was a lot of focus on the offline as well. We still do organize exhibitions. We organize the world's largest photography competition with something like 270, 280,000 photos submitted to this year's edition. We develop and produce magazines. We organize masterclasses, talks. We invite photographers to give lectures to our community. We organize global photo walks with the sole purpose of enabling.
Something that I know I'm very personally interested in, and so we're looking forward to your presentation. Help me welcome Ramzi.
Thank you. I do not need that.
No.
Nor this. Cool, yeah. Thanks, Katrien. It's really cool being here. And I'm looking forward to an open conversation about what technology is doing to photography and to the world of photography. So at EyeEm, we're primarily, first and foremost, about community. We started this company 6 years ago, give or take, with this vision of enabling, empowering amateur photographers